Most people don't understand that by just decriminalizing an ounce or less of marijuana, you can actually save lives.
The legislation recommends that Rhode Island pass legislation similar to Massachusetts in decriminalizing an ounce or less with a $150 fine that would be used predominantly for programs on treatment and education of those under 18. And I feel very strongly that the current system does no good except to maybe exaggerate and actually bring people into contact with parts of society that will make their problem worse rather than better, whereas resources being diverted to treatment and education give everybody a better opportunity to be diverted away from what would make it more of a problem instead of less of a problem.
As a result of passing this initiative in Massachusetts to decriminalize an ounce of marijuana or less, make it a civil fine, $100, it speeds up the process so much for our police officers. It saves about 4 hours per person. So the average amount of arrests for this violation a year in the state of Massachusetts, they figured was 7,500. When you figure out all those hours that are saved, that's the equivalent of 19 extra police officers every year. 19 extra police officers that instead of protecting us from somebody using marijuana can be protecting us from people who kill other people, rape other people, who commit arsons and robberies. This is very important stuff.
When they told me that I was going to do the 6 months or the year, I looked at him like, are you serious? Like this crime does not outweigh the time. Like there's no way in the world that a joint is going to cost me a year of my life and take me a year away from my children and my education. You're suspending my whole life for something so minute and so little. Like, there's better things out there to do. I'm not a violent person. I love my children. Every other weekend I have my nieces and my 2 kids, and we sit down and we watch movies, we color. I'm not one of those people that are out in the streets and looking for trouble or anything like that. I'm a homebody. I'm a family person. I tell you what, my mom was a drug addict. I was 9 years old and she was a heroin addict. And I was taking care of a younger brother and a mother. So I knew what it was like to be around drugs. And I always told myself I was never going to do it. The only thing is that I have a debilitating disease. I have migraines. And I've had it all my life. And I never knew what the problem was until I approached my doctor about it. And the fact is, it does help. The marijuana does help with the migraines. It alleviates my pain. It helps me relax. It keeps me in a state of mind where I can control myself.
The arguments about decriminalizing marijuana don't rest totally on how harmful or how risky marijuana is, or the fact that marijuana is considerably less risky than toxic substances like alcohol, which cause much greater problems, or cigarette smoking, which cost astronomical cardiac and death every year. So it's not just that. It's that you look at marijuana as a substance by itself. You want to know what the scientific risks are. But the arguments about decriminalization have a lot to do with whether we ought to be using the criminal law for this purpose.
The first time I was arrested for marijuana possession, I didn't have any marijuana. I had an empty plastic bag, and I pleaded guilty just to get it over with and to move forward, never figuring that I'd be back in court. Well, a couple of years later, I was back in court again for nominal amounts. I mean, you know, a joint, a half a joint. I never dealt any marijuana, and the worst thing that happened to me was when I was convicted, they took away my right to vote. I was disenfranchised for maybe 10 years or something. I used to be part of politics. I used to, you know, work at the polls. I worked for different candidates and everything, and they took away my right to vote. You know, it put me on the fringe of society, even though, you know, I felt like a member of society with a secret.
There's societal impacts. There's There's law enforcement issues. There's, you know, whether it's equitable with tobacco and alcohol laws. These are all interesting ways to discuss drug policy. But when you're in a deficit situation, a lot of legislators won't listen to you and aren't interested unless the highlight of what you discuss is about the budgetary implications of what you're doing and the budgetary implications of what's been done in the past. And what's done in the past is very expensive. Prohibition is very expensive.
My estimates are that governments in the U.S. spend in total about $14 billion a year enforcing prohibition. That's only one part of the cost of prohibition. Prohibition has a lot of ancillary effects, which most people would think of as cost: increased violence, lower quality control, infringements on civil liberties, but the government expenditure is in the ballpark of $14 billion a year. My estimates of what Rhode Island is spending on drug prohibition are $40.5 million per year. If you're talking about decriminalization relative to prohibition, by decriminalizing, Rhode Island would save about $11 million per year. So my view of the evidence and the economic analysis of marijuana prohibition is that basically all the effects are undesirable. The only possible benefit someone could claim from prohibiting marijuana would be reduced use of marijuana. And the evidence suggests that whatever reduction is achieved by prohibition is pretty small, and it shouldn't necessarily be considered a benefit for policy to reduce marijuana use. To the extent people can use marijuana responsibly, moderately, in ways which don't harm other people, that should be their business, and we're reducing their welfare, their liberty, their freedom by discouraging their marijuana use. So some of the reduction in use caused by prohibition is itself a cost of prohibition. So it's really incredibly hard to make any good argument for current policy.